Hello, everyone, and welcome to your 2023 year ahead horoscope for Scorpio risings. Now, of course, you can watch this if you're a Scorpio sun, but it might make a little bit more sense if you watch it from your rising sign. So with that being said, in this video, we're going to be first talking about the major transits of 2023, just kind of going over the highlights. Then I'm going to be going into advice for Scorpio risings, things to keep in mind, mindsets to have so you can have a successful year. And then after that, we're going to be going month by month of 2023, breaking down the major transits. So make sure you like this video so you can come back to it throughout the year, follow up on some of the predictions, as well leave me a comment below. What months are you looking forward to? What transits are you not looking forward to? And also let me know if the astrology is lining up with any plans or big goals that you have for this year. So let's go ahead and get started. Now, this is a two-part video series. I did a video going into the major transits of 2023, and I talk about the transits more in depth there. And so make sure you watch that video so when you come back here, it's going to make more sense in how it relates to you. But the major transits that we have this year are first Saturn going into Pisces. This is a really big shift that we're going to be seeing over the next few years. I'll be talking more about it. Pluto is going to be going into Aquarius. All of this happens in March. March is the biggest month of this year. I've said this a lot for quite some time now. But the Pluto ingress, this is a 20-year-long shift. So you're going to see a lot of not only the world, but throughout the next 20 years, you're going to see a pretty big part of your chart completely change. Jupiter is going to ingress into Taurus. This is awesome for the Scorpio risings, in my opinion. Really good for relationships. And then the nodes are going to be shifting signs this year into Aries and Libra. So this will be shifting over the eclipse axis. The eclipses will be happening in a different sign this year. That starts this summer, and then this summer we have a Venus retrograde in Leo. This is going to be a really awesome transit. It might have some problems for you guys, but I actually really like it for the Scorpio risings, and that's going to be happening all summer, and those are really the major transits. So let's talk about things to keep in mind. This year has a big focus on health. There's a lot of health stuff going on. Not bad. It's just there's going to be a bigger focus on health and keeping up with health. Relationships, go big or go home. Jupiter's going into your 7th house. You're probably going to get in a relationship or might meet someone, or you might have experiences that make you think a little bit deeper and, question what you really value in relationships. Responsibility with kids, sex, pleasure, recreation, and art. Saturn is going into your 5th house. It's time to take this area of your life seriously and be more disciplined about it. And also getting over it. There's a lot of shit you guys just straight up got to get over. You guys are Scorpio risings. You can hold on to a lot, and I'll be talking about that as we go along. So, I want to do this actually. So the first two major transits I want to talk about are Mars stationing direct and Mercury stationing direct. Now, these don't happen until about the middle of January, and there's one thing I want to talk about first that we actually go into January with. And so as you can see here in the top left corner, this is where the dates are at if I don't actually mention it explicitly. But Jupiter is going back into Aries pretty much right before the new year. Now, Jupiter has already dipped into Aries. That happened from May, June, July, August, September, and October. But then it went back into Pisces. When we start the new year, Jupiter is going to be going back into your 6th house. Jupiter in your chart rules over your 2nd house of money and finances and resources, as well as your 5th house of love, pleasure, sex, romance, recreation, creativity, children. And that's been going into that's going to be going into your 6th house of work, routine, health, habits. And so Jupiter and Aries into your 6th house is probably going to be expanding, your work, what you do every single day, probably making some more money at this time. Maybe the job that you have also includes having a little bit of fun. So that seems really, really nice. But if you're expecting to start the new year off with like this ambitious, excited energy, I don't think that's going to happen. I think when Mars stations direct, things will actually feel like they're starting to move forward. Same thing with Mercury stationing direct, but we'll talk about that. Mars has been in your 8th house now for quite some time, and you've had a pretty brutal Mars retrograde in your 8th house. The 8th house rules other people's money, death, debt, taxes, the occult, secrets. Mars is your ruling planet, so wherever Mars is at is going to pretty much be describing what you're doing. The 8th house is not a fun house. It is a very hardcore house. And so over these past 8 months, you've probably been really anxious, probably had a lot of anxiety. Your ascendant ruler is in the 8th house of other people's stuff. So maybe you've been forced to be using other people's resources or using up other people's resources more than you normally would. Mars in Gemini is being pulled in 2 different ways and being distracted. And we had that Mars retrograde where, maybe you were, getting involved in a bunch of stuff that was really distracting. And then over the winter, you kind of backtracked a little bit, kind of got your focus together. Then you're going to be able to go over everything that you've been doing over this past winter, this time with a more better mindset, with more tools, with more wisdom, starting on January 12th. You still got about 2 more months of Mars in your 8th house, so that's going to be pretty rough. Like, this is a really rough transit. I've talked a lot about the Scorpio risings. Like, this is not a fun transit for you guys. You get 2 more months of that, but at this point, at least things are moving forward. Then we get to our second transit, and that is Mercury stationing direct. Mercury will be stationing retrograde just before the new year in Capricorn, which is in your 3rd house of communication, technology, short distance travel, siblings, neighbors, people around you. The 3rd house is also like technology, and Mercury retrogrades are often like problems with technology. So I just really think that at this point there might be besides a miscommunication with like a sibling or a neighbor, there might be some problems with tech that you have. But when Mercury stations direct on the 18th, all of that gets cleared up. And I think by the time Mercury stations direct, this is where that new year energy is really going to kick in, because now everything is starting to move forward. So that brings us to February. The only thing that's going on in February is Mercury is going to be leaving shadow. Again, we have this Mercury retrograde. Mercury, I think, enters shadow in the middle of December, and then it will be retrograde pretty much all of January. Once it leaves shadow, this is where all of that 3rd house stuff gets cleared up. So whether it's, siblings, just communication in general, plans with short distance travel. Once Mercury leaves shadow, everything will start to be feeling like it's moving forward, and you can move on to something else. That's really it in February. And what's interesting about February is it's really the calm before the storm. Because as I've said a lot over the past couple months, March is the biggest month this year. And let's start talking about it. Number one, the first thing that we have going on is this Venus-Jupiter conjunction happening in Aries. I like this for you guys, for the most part. It's going to be making its conjunction in the 6th house: work, labor, routine, health, habits, pets, coworkers. And so again, Jupiter has just freshly entered your 6th house of work and routine. And so maybe you've been doing more work. Maybe you've been working more, making more money. The biggest difference here is now Venus is going to conjoin Jupiter. The problem is Venus is in detriment in Aries, meaning Venus doesn't really do well in Aries. And Venus rules your 12th house of isolation, alienation, repressed, unacknowledged parts of yourself. It also rules your 7th house of relationships, and it's in the 6th house of health, work, day-to-day activities. So this could be some problems with health coming up. I would really pay attention to that during this time. But Jupiter is expanding your work, expanding your routines. Venus is there, so maybe there's someone there that is, considered a friend, or someone that you enjoy being with, that you're doing a lot of this work with. And it's also on Chiron. The problem with Chiron is the wounded healer, so there might be something that's healing about this, but that kind of stings. Maybe like the way I like to look at it's like pouring alcohol in an open wound. Like it's going to hurt, but it's to clean the wound. So there's something going on with health, work, even pets, coworkers, revolving relationships. That seems very fun. It's Venus and Jupiter together. It's very ambitious. It's very I don't want to say sexual. It kind of is for you guys, but like it's fun. It's flirty. And Chiron's there. It might sting a little bit. It might be a little bit hard, but it is fun. So then we get to the 7th, about 5 days later, and Saturn enters Pisces. Saturn has been in Aquarius for the past 2.5 years, where it's been in your 4th house of home, family, and living situation. Saturn rules authority and maturity and discipline, and it's, kind of been really hardcore with your living situation. Maybe you've been feeling more distant from your parents. Maybe you've felt trapped at home. That's all changing when Saturn enters Pisces. And now it's going to be entering your 5th house of sex, passion, creativity, arts, children, recreation. And so Saturn is asking you to be more disciplined and responsible in an area of your life. And as Saturn goes into your 5th house, there is going to be this kind of like, not necessarily what do I want, but like, am I getting what I want? Saturn is asking you to be more disciplined, more mature again with sex, love, romance. It's also in Pisces too. So Pisces asks you to be more like fluid and open and not so like rigid. I mean, you have Jupiter ruling your 5th house, so you guys are party people in general. But Saturn going here is like, it's time to get a little bit of grip on reality when it comes to, fun, sex, romance, especially if you're an artist, getting very serious about your art during this time. And that's going to be something that continues out for the next 2.5, 3 years. So you've got some time to figure this stuff out. After that, Pluto is going to be entering Aquarius. And like I said, I have a whole podcast about this on my show, The Delineation. Make sure you check it out. This is really deep stuff. This is not lighthearted stuff. And you're going to see a big change in like the world when this happens. But Pluto's now going into your 4th house, home, family, living situation, parents. And Pluto rules things like fear, control, power. It rules corruption. It rules governments and corporations. And so what I would ask for you here is, as Pluto enters your 4th house, you're going to be challenged with your living situation due to things like fear. Pluto and Aquarius might be even some like government authorities kind of coming in and making some problems with your living situation. Again, this is a 20-year long transit, so it's like, take this with a grain of salt. You're just going to see this, progress as we go on for the next 2 decades. But what I would say is with Pluto, it can be really easy to bend to the knee of fear. And this is a time to really take power in that. Like Pluto and Aquarius of maybe, this is a hardcore analogy, but Aquarius rules outcasting and it's in your 4th house of family. Rather than using that as like a victim story, use that to empower you in some way. Use your 4th house living situation thing to empower your life, essentially, is what's going on here. But again, that's like a 20-year long transit. That's going to take a long time to really materialize. But then after that, about 3 days later, Mars enters Cancer. This is what, I am going to cry for the Scorpio risings because this is going to be so needed. This is going to, Mars going into Cancer would typically suck for you guys, but I think because it's been in your 8th house for so long, this is going to feel so good. Mars is going to be going into your 9th house of spirituality, religion, far distance travel, higher education, publishing, social media. The only problem with this is Mars is, going into Cancer. It doesn't do well in Cancer. You guys are Scorpio risings. You're ruled by Mars. So Mars is all about fights, conflicts, confrontation, separating, cutting. And Mars in Cancer, Cancer is all about nurturing and defending and protecting. So Mars can't be this this warrior in Cancer. It has to be a defender and a protector. And it's going into your 9th house of spirituality, astrology, publishing. And so you're going to be involved in more traveling, more, social media, more broadcasting stuff. But it's Mars in Cancer. It seems like, you need to be more on the defensive end. Maybe this is something you go and travel and you do some traveling for some healing. Mars has been in your 8th house and just been giving you anxiety nonstop. So as much as I don't like Mars in Cancer because you guys aren't going to feel ramped up, this is finally just some other energy for you guys. So as much as I don't like Mars in Cancer, I think it's going to be good for the Scorpio risings. Then we get into April. Then we have our Jupiter Cazimi in Aries. This is happening on the 11th. What a Cazimi is when a planet conjoins the sun or the sun conjoins a planet, right? And what this does is it restarts or refreshes that planet's energy, that planet's narrative. Jupiter is going through your 6th house of work, labor, routine, health, habits. And so Jupiter's been flying through your 6th house. There's been all this expansion with work. There's been all this expansion with health stuff. But you're really going to see a shift or a restart, especially when it comes to money. Jupiter rules your 2nd house of money, and it's in your 6th house of work. So maybe you get a pay raise around this time. It's also your 5th house ruler of love, romance, sex, pleasure, recreation, and it's in your 6th house. So there's going to be some new thing around 5th house stuff. So fun, creative things with work that begins anew around this time. Sounds pretty exciting. But a lot of this has to do with health, and I'm going to explain why here in just a second. So right after that, about a week later on the 19th, we get our first solar eclipse in Aries. Now, at this point, the North Node is still in Taurus, the South Node is still in Scorpio, but this will be setting up the next set of eclipses for us for the next year and a half. This is in Aries, so your 6th house of work, labor, routine, health, habits, all of that stuff. And what eclipses are kind of like emergency events. They kind of take all of your attention away and make you focus on one area of your life. And this is happening in your 6th house of work, employment, health, coworkers, pets. So this sounds like a really dramatic change to your work, to your schedule, to your routine, and to your health. And this is like a starting point. This is like something very new. This is something that is going to continue for the next year and a half. And this is an Aries sign, that's right? And it's another Mars-ruled sign. So action, energy, doing more with your routine, doing more workouts, working even harder. That's all stuff coming up on this eclipse. But it's going to be eclipses are again, emergency events. They take your attention away, and there's going to be this hyper focus here on the 19th to 20th on work, routine, and health. This is why I was also saying health stuff is going to be a big thing for you guys this year. But then right after that, literally 2 days later, we get what I am calling the first Mercury retrograde of 2023. This is happening in Taurus, in your 7th house of relationships and others. So Mercury retrogrades, again, miscommunications, changes, delays, plans moving. And this is in your 7th house of relationships. Now, what's important about this is Mercury is going to be retrograding in these early parts of Taurus, and Jupiter is about to enter Taurus. So this is kind of like getting the paperwork ready for Jupiter to come through and expand everything, right? We really like Jupiter in your 7th house this year. But as Mercury conjoins Uranus, there's going to be some type of unexpected, destabilizing thing that happens in this relationship. It's going to feel really intense. It's going to feel very, pivotal. And so this might kind of throw you off a little bit, but this is kind of like relearning or rethinking about relationships before Jupiter comes in. As we get into May, and the thing is about April is April really ramps us up for the spring and the summer. And then as we get to May, we have our last lunar eclipse in Scorpio here on Cinco de Mayo. The nodes have been in Scorpio and Taurus since January of 2022. So I want you to think about what was going on in the middle of May of 2022 and the beginning of November of 2022, because there's something about that you're going to be coming back to. This has to do with the first house of the self, body, image, your personality. And the South node has been in your first house, where if you guys watch my 2022 year ahead horoscope, the South node is this purge and this exhaustion and just this drain. And so you've probably gotten rid of a lot of stuff, went through some more health stuff, let go of a lot of bullshit. But this eclipse is, the analogy I've been using is like, okay, if you've ever moved a house before, there's the day where you move the big furniture and you get all of the boxes. And then there's the day where you wrap it all up and clean it all up. Like, wash the floors, clean the windows, that kind of thing. That's what this eclipse is. You've already done the heavy purging way back in, again, May of 2022 and November of 2022. This is just the last round of cleanup. And this has a lot to do with relationships. This has a lot to do with, yourself and things that you need to change about yourself in order to maintain these relationships. So it just seems like it's one last little gut-wrenching purge, but it's just the last one in Scorpio. So after this, you're done. Things will get better for you once this is done. Excuse me. So then right after that, this is what's really interesting. We have the Scorpio eclipse in your 1st and 7th house, and then Jupiter enters Taurus right after that. This is going into your 7th house of relationships, others. Jupiter expands. Jupiter brings gifts. Jupiter brings abundance. And it's going into your 7th house of relationships. Sounds like a lot of you guys are going to be in relationships if you aren't already. Jupiter rules your 5th house of sex, love and romance, and it's going into your 7th house. Also rules 2nd house of money, going into 7th house. So again, it seems like a lot of sexual relationship stuff. Eventually here too, Jupiter is going to be sextiling Saturn. So this is just really constructive, really good energy for like long-term relationships, for commitment, and for getting the things that you want. And Jupiter's in the sign of, Taurus, right? This is expanding value, expanding security, expanding stability within the relationship. So then right after that, we get to about the 20th, just a few days later, and this is when Mars enters Leo. So the Mars ingresses this year seem to be really important because they all follow up something, or they all get followed up with something. Eventually this summer, we're going to be having a Venus retrograde in Leo, but this Mars ingress kind of kicks off the problems because, again, Mars is fights, conflicts, heating things up, drama, and it's going into your 10th house of your career, legacy, reputation. This is important because you have a Venus retrograde coming up here, so you're going to be having a whole work and career change anyway. But Mars goes into Leo, goes into your 10th house. Mars in Leo is about being bold, brash, courageous, and it's going to be going opposite Pluto. So there might be this opposition to this living situation thing that you have going on, like Pluto in your 4th house. There's some type of power, corruption with family, living situation stuff that this is going to feel like you're going to be at odds with and that you're going to oppose. It's squaring Jupiter in your 7th house, though, so there's going to be this weird dynamic between you and your job, your relationship, and your living situation. I don't know exactly what that will look like, but that's what's coming up here. And so as Mars enters your 10th house, this sounds like drama at work, a lot of fights and conflicts at work. It's very Mars and Leo, like, ego stuff, kind of just fighting for the sake of glory. So try not to get caught up in that kind of bullshit. But again, Mars is going to be causing a bunch of issues here that Venus is going to eventually go over in retrograde, and you're going to have a whole change in your work and your career anyway. So then we get to June. And the first thing that we have going on June 1st, is Jupiter conjoining Rahu. So otherwise known as the North Node. Again, this is in your 7th house of relationships. And the big thing here is the North Node is still in Taurus. And the North Node is this all-consuming, super, like, the North Node just pulls you in a certain direction for better or for worse. And since January of 2022, you've been really focused on relationships, other people. Your attention has been focused there. Whether that's worked out or not, I don't know. But the North Node has had this big pulling towards relationships. Now, the North Node overconsumes as it is, but Jupiter is things in excess. And Jupiter is things like, going big or going home. And so Jupiter conjoining the North Node in your 7th house is like, try not to get married that fast. Don't maybe some of you are going to get married, but Jupiter North Node is like really overdoing it in relationships. And there's something good about that, right? It's your 5th ruler of sex in the 7th house of relationships. We want a lot of that. It's also your 2nd house ruler of money on the North Node in 7th house of relationships. If you're in a partnership, they're probably going to be making a lot of money. This all seems really good. The question is, how much is too much? And that's something that you want to really be asking yourself at this point, like knowing when you're over consuming and doing things in excess. But other than that, it's awesome. Like a lot of big relationship energy. So then right after that, though, this is the kicker. Saturn stations retrograde on June 16th. Again, Saturn's in your 5th house, sex, passion, creativity. And as Saturn goes direct, I'm using the same analogy and story as in all of these horoscopes. But Saturn being direct and moving into a new sign is like gaining some type of authority or power or maturity or discipline in a new area of your life. And the analogy I've been using is like, it's like getting a management position. You get this sense of authority and it's really exciting and good. But when you're like, let's just say like a regular retail worker, you might be like, oh, it must be nice to be a manager. When Saturn stations retrograde, this is when you realize the responsibilities that come with that. So, for example, while it might be fun to be in authority and in control, there's going to be a point where you have to learn how to handle that. Like Saturn going retrograde is like, okay, well, if you want to be in this position of authority, you're going to have to, you're going to be having different problems than what other people would have. You're going to be having to mature in other ways that other people wouldn't have to. And as Saturn stations retrograde, this is going to be like where you have to kind of fill in the shoes. And, if you've gotten this position of authority or leadership, you're going to have to like earn that essentially. And as Saturn goes retrograde in your 5th house, this is going to be like, oh, what am I committed to long-term when it comes to my art, my recreation and fun? What is the long-term effects of what I'm doing? Those are going to be the questions that you ask. And this is going to be that maturation process, that getting very real about these topics. Then when we get to the 19th, about 3 days later, that's when Venus enters shadow. Again, this Venus retrograde is happening in your 10th house of career. And at this point, Venus is already in Leo. So let's pull up the chart here. Venus and Mars in your 10th house is fun. A lot of fun, a lot of flirty, a lot of, this year looks really awesome for you guys, to be honest with you. It's really not that bad. But Mars and Venus in your 10th house is a lot of fun, maybe a lot of drama. But Venus is evening star at this point, entering shadow. So what that means is there's something that's going to happen on this day, on the 19th, that you're going to be coming back to here in a couple months. Evening star Venus is like Venus is all about like connection and value and attraction. And evening star Venus, things come to Venus. But she's in Leo. This has to do with attention. This has to do with being seen and being witnessed. And it's in your 10th house of like public reputation. Everyone can see it. And you're probably going to be getting some attention that you may not necessarily like. This might have to do with work stuff. Venus also rules your 12th house of hidden enemies, so there might be some hidden enemy at work trying to sabotage you. Not to sow any Scorpio distrust, but that's pretty much what's going on. This is also your 7th house ruler of relationships entering shadow in the 10th house. So maybe you go public with a new relationship and there's going to be this, or maybe you start dating someone and there's this weird trial period. Either way, we're going to be coming back to this, but there's something that starts on this day that is going to eventually be changing and you're going to be coming back to. So then we get to July. Mars enters Virgo. The only reason this Mars ingress is important is because we are going to also be having a Mercury retrograde in Virgo. So it sounds like to me, whatever problems Mars starts when it enters Virgo, Mercury is going to clean up and handle. But Mars is going to be going into your 11th house of community, networks, friends. So Mars is frustration, fights, conflicts. It's going to go into your 11th house of friends. It's Mars in Virgo, being too nitpicky, being too detailed, being too specific, being too anal. You guys are good at that. And so Mars going into your 11th house is probably just fights with friends, or maybe separating yourself from some friends. I mean, it sounds like you guys are dating someone right now, so probably just not spending that much time with friends. But it's Mars in Virgo too, like maybe being hypercritical of the people that you're with and stuff like that. So we'll come back to that with the Mercury thing. But then after that, about 2 weeks later, this is when we have the North Node and the South Node enter Aries and Libra. This is really important for you guys. The North Node is entering your 6th house. And again, that North Node is that drive, that urge, that hunger for a specific direction. And it's going into your 6th house of work, labor, routine, health, habits, pets, coworkers. But at the same time, the South Node, which represents this drain, exhaustion, which you have to purge and get rid of, is entering Libra, the sign of peace and balance. And it's going into your 12th house of isolation, self-sabotage, repressed thoughts and feelings. And so at this time, this is kind of looking like, you know, the 12th house is the subconscious and things that you repress. And Libra is like, oh, like everything being fine and dandy. And this just seems like there's going to be something that comes up here where you're going to be focusing more on your health, more on your day-to-day activities. But at the expense, the South Node in Libra in your 12th house is like getting rid of beliefs that don't serve you, checking where you sabotage yourself. You're going to want to recluse. You're going to want to regress. And that's going to be the hardest part about this, especially South Node in Libra is like, Aries, the North Node in Aries is like you have to be assertive and you have to take action. And the South Node in Libra is like, even if that means things not being balanced. The South Node in Libra is like getting rid of peace, getting rid of fairness. And as that goes to your 12th house of repressed, unacknowledged parts of yourself, it's like you might have to be, I know this sounds brutal, but like, I don't want to just say harsh on yourself because I don't really like always really believe that, or I should say that's not always the best advice for everybody. But there is going to be this kind of, you know, where you might see things in a very dandy way, or, you know, even with Libra, you know, fairness and balance, it's like stuff you put on the back burner. That's all stuff that you're going to have to regurgitate and work through a little bit more in order to focus on the 6th house stuff. And again, the 12th house stuff is getting rid of stuff that you don't even know is in your way in order to focus on this health and this work and this routine. And so there's just going to be things that come up that you didn't know was a problem that you're going to have to get rid of. Then 4 days later, Venus stations retrograde. You guys are having a big work change this year. Big relation, like this year is work and relationships for you guys. I know it's very simple, but that's really the big thing. Again, Venus is stationing retrograde in your 10th house. Now, how this works is Venus is an evening star at this point, right? She's receiving this attention. She entered shadow. She was questioning that. And as Venus goes retrograde, this is a value shift. And this rules your 7th house of relationships and open enemies and your 12th house of hidden enemies. And that is changing in your 10th house. So the way that people address you, the 10th house also can rule relationships because that's a title, and relationships in traditional astrology used to be like a family thing. But as Venus goes retrograde in Leo, this is changing the way that you have people see you. You have changing your value in how people see you and what they see you for. So that's going to be a really weird process. But this seems also like a big career change. Something that I keep forgetting to mention is Venus retrogrades in the same sign every 8 years. So I want you to think about what was going on in the summer of 2015, because you're going to be coming back to or there's going to be some type of repeat of that starting this summer. So keep that in mind. So then we get to August. Literally 3 weeks later, we have the halfway point of the Venus retrograde, and this is that Venus Cazimi moment. Again, this is refreshing, restarting Venus's topics. Venus is undergoing a value shift when it comes to attention and limelight in your 10th house of career. And so this is where Venus stations retrograde and you realize you're undergoing a relation, not even a relationship change. I mean, that's true for this, but like a value shift. But then when Venus conjoins the sun, it's like it hits you. Because Venus retrograding is like, it's kind of like when you start something new, the first couple weeks of it, are nice, but then this is like when you start to see the results where it's like, no, I actually do value this differently. No, I actually do see this a little bit differently. And so this could be just taking your relationship to the next level. This can be more public, maybe something about marriage. But a lot of it's also just like how people see you in your world. This may have to do with social media, might have to do with work. A lot of people's work involves social media. But it's very public. I know Scorpio risings like to be, sometimes hidden and in the corners, but this is a very public transit. And I think as this Venus Cazimi happens, there's this realization of how you want to be seen, how you want to be recognized, how you want to be witnessed, how you want to be, glorified. And then, a week and a half later, we have our Mercury retrograde in Virgo. Again, this is in your 11th house of community, networks, friends. And the biggest thing here is, like I said, Mars has been transiting your 11th house, causing some issues. Mercury is about right there. And it's not until the 24th that Mercury goes retrograde where this is some kind of miscommunication or change of friendships and networks and communities. Probably a fight, probably an argument. But as Mercury goes retrograde over in Virgo in your 11th house, this is kind of like reorganizing your friends, making connections again, talking to people that maybe you haven't talked to in a while, especially if it's over hostile stuff. That's really what this Mercury retrograde in Virgo is about. And Mars is going to be causing a lot of those issues. But then you have this Mercury retrograde in Virgo where you fuck something up with your friends or something. But then Mars enters Libra. It's happening on the 28th, 4 days after. And this is going into your 12th house of isolation, self-sabotage, repressed thoughts, feelings. Mars is your ruling planet, and Mars is going to be going into detriment here. So Mars is about fights, conflicts, addressing things, and Libra is about not that, right? Being more fair, being more peaceful, being more balanced. But as your ascendant ruler is in your 12th house, there's going to be this feeling of self-sabotage, this feeling of really being hard on yourself, being very indecisive or unsure, and maybe more willing to do things for other people than for the sake of yourself. I think this is when health stuff is also going to come up really big during this time. But, and that's also because we're going to be having eclipses here and a bunch of transits in Libra here soon. And Mars is going to kick all of this off. So you might be spending more time alone, more by yourself, or more hidden and just tucked away than normal. It's Mars in Libra. Maybe you're more spending more hideaway time with a relationship. But I think at the same time, you might be a little bit hard on yourself, but you just can't really put a pin in what your problem is. So then we get to September, and this is when Venus stations direct in Leo. So at this point, Venus is now morning star, and morning star Venus is much more ambitious and goes after what she wants versus evening star Venus, like things just come to her. So as Venus stations direct in Leo, this is like, I want to be seen this way. I want to be witnessed this way, and this is the way that we're moving forward. And this has to do with 12th house stuff. So things that you keep hidden. Maybe you come public with stuff that you usually keep hidden and you keep repressed. This is also 7th house stuff. So maybe you've been dating someone in secret and maybe you come out with it a little bit more. That happens when Venus stations direct on the 4th. But more importantly, also on the 4th, Jupiter stations retrograde. And this is what's really interesting about this transit is we get to, September 4th? Venus stations direct, right? So there's this big forward movement with career, work, reputation. But then Jupiter, who is in Venus's sign, mind you, Venus has been squaring Jupiter this whole time. Jupiter goes retrograde. And so Jupiter going into a sign and being direct is like giving you all of these opportunities, giving you all of this abundance, giving you all of these things. 7th house of relationships, right? Jupiter going retrograde is where that faith comes into like crisis almost. Jupiter retrogrades are a time to create gratitude and thankfulness in yourself, because when Jupiter goes retrograde, it's like the money machine stops. Like money printer don't go burr no more. And so this is when you're going to become more reflective on your relationship, more reflective of what you believe about relationships. What do you believe about value? What do you believe about sanctity and security? And so it's really interesting that Venus stations direct and your 7th house ruler is in a whole new phase, and then Jupiter retrogrades here. So this seems like another big shift with relationships, but this time you're starting something new, and now you're thinking and believing about relationships in a completely different way. Jupiter has a lot to do with belief. So when Jupiter goes retrograde, it's like questioning your beliefs. Then after that, here on the 16th, Mercury stations direct in Virgo. All of that stuff with your friendships gets worked out. You'll probably feel a little bit better in that regard, but that's not really the biggest deal here. That again happens on the 16th? Yeah. So what's more important is right after that, we get into October. And this is where things kind of get a little gnarly. Mars conjoins the South Node in Libra on the 4th. So this is going to be gnarly for the Scorpio risings, for a couple other people too. But again, Mars is in your 12th house: isolation, self-sabotage, repressed thoughts and feelings, hidden enemies. Mars is your ascendant ruler, so it literally rules you. It represents you. And this Mars South Node thing is like, there's something that you got to get rid of. I don't know what it is. Mars is in your 12th house of like repressed thoughts. It's in Libra, so it's very indecisive. But Mars in the South Node is like draining and exhausting, and it's just time to get rid of something. And I mean, it's in Libra, so we're talking about, peace, and we're talking about, fairness. We're talking about justice. We're talking about relationships. And so this just seems like where there, and Mars also rules your 6th house too. I think this is also like not peak health stuff, but this could Mars rules your 6th house of health, ill health specifically, and your 1st house of your body, and it's in detriment in the 12th. If you're not feeling good, this is a time to check in. Like, don't just ignore it. Like, this is a time to really figure out what the fuck's going on with your body if you have some issues. But I think at this point too is when maybe a lot of that is brought more into focus and becomes a little bit more clear, like what the issues are, what you can change to make yourself feel better. This also might be when you realize like someone is a hidden enemy, where you are getting in your own way, and this is a time to really get over it and get over yourself, I think too. But right after that, like a week later, Mars enters Scorpio. It's going into your 1st house of the self, the body. And this is where things get supercharged for you, because the South Node has been going through Scorpio for some time, and the past year and a half has been really draining and exhausting, right? Now Mars is going into your 1st house without the South Node there, and Mars is your 1st house ruler. So you might be more frustrated and angry than normal, but Mars in Scorpio is like you're going to be extremely energized, action-packed, doing a bunch. Like maybe you have, like again, maybe Mars in the 12th house in Libra on the South Node is like binging, and then you kind of get over it, and then it's like, fuck it, I need to go ham. I need to be like on point with my stuff. That's what's happening here. And this seems like a really big recharge to yourself, your image, your personality. It seems really good. At least things start to move, at least things start to get better here, or at least appear to get better. The only other last hardcore thing you guys have going on is the solar eclipse in Libra. We haven't had an eclipse in Libra, and this is also just 2 days after this, but we haven't had an eclipse in Libra yet. So this is our first one. And again, it's on the South Node. So some type of purge, drain, releasing, getting rid of. It's in your 12th house: isolation, self-sabotage, repressed thoughts and feelings. It also rules things like hospitals and asylums. So this is really where, like, you have to do more purging. And I think with this being in Libra too, this is where it gets a little bit confusing for me, because Libra ruling the 12th house is weird. But your 12th ruler, Venus, is now fallen in Virgo in the 11th house, and it's opposite Saturn. In my opinion, maybe you need to get rid of some friends. Maybe you need to stop caring what other people think about you. Maybe it's time to realize you're not perfect and that not everyone's going to like you. Maybe that's what this is. But this is an ending and a getting rid of, an ideal or, a peaceful situation and kind of moving into a different direction. So that brings us to November. Right as we start November on the 4th, Saturn stations direct in Pisces, 5th house, sex, passion, creativity, all that fun stuff. And again, Saturn's been retrograde this whole time, so you've been going through this process of like, maturity, growing up, being more disciplined about, your hobbies, what you enjoy, maybe being more of a parent. But as Saturn stations direct, it's like you've grown into those shoes now. Saturn being retrograde is like like if you want to be a professional athlete, like let's say you get drafted to the NFL and, you're really excited, but then you realize, oh man, I have to work out like an actual athlete. There's going to be this training period that is going to, challenge your discipline and challenge your abilities. Saturn stationing direct is like, you have now matured and gained control over that area. And now you can go back over all of this stuff with, more wisdom, more authority, and just a better, state of mind around it. So Saturn stations direct in your 5th house, I think all of the love, romance, sex, pleasure, children stuff gets a little bit more clear, and you have a better idea of where you need to be responsible in this area. Now, after that, here on the 17th, about a week and a half, 2 weeks later, this is where we have our Mars cazimi in Scorpio. And again, a cazimi is a refreshing point, right? Like a restarting point. Now, before I get into that, I want to show you, if I zoom in here a little bit, this is here on the 4th. Mars is going to be going through Scorpio, and it's first going to make an opposition to Jupiter and then an opposition to Uranus. So this is going to create a bunch of instability in the relationships. And, you might be on a sick one and just kind of letting loose and saying fuck you to everyone. That's probably what this is. But then after all of that up and down with other people and relationships, then we have this Mars Cazimi. And Mars, Mars' cycle around the sun is often analogized or brought with the hero's journey story. I'm coining this as like the villain origin story, because Mars rules your first house of yourself, your body, your sixth house of work and routine. The sun rules your 10th house of career, and these 2 points are meeting together in your first house in Scorpio. This is a time to really dig in deep for your roots, to start something new, to grow a big tree, essentially. I think you're going to be really energized. I think you're going to be really ambitious about starting something. It's Scorpio stuff, so maybe it's like fixating something. Again, maybe you've been doing this job for a little while now, and you got over some bullshit that you had to go through, and now you're feeling more charged up for work and just for doing things in general. I actually really like this for you, although it might kind of sting and burn. Then after that, Mars enters Sagittarius. Isn't really the biggest deal in the world, but there is a reason why I brought it up. This happens a few days later on the 24th. Mars enters your second house of money, finances, possessions, resources. And the big thing with this is Mars enters Sag, and then immediately as it enters Sagittarius, it squares Saturn. So Saturn's in your fifth house, right? Being more responsible and disciplined with the fun, the partying. But Mars goes into your second house of money, and you're probably going to be spending more money around this time. And it's Sagittarius, so going here, going there. And there's something about the money that you're spending that's kind of getting in the way of like your day-to-day stuff and your living situation stuff, and just overall, like what you're responsible over. Maybe what you're spending money on doing isn't actually fun. Like maybe you're actually being like, oh, this isn't fun for me anymore. So there's something around, what is this, the 24th, where, you start spending some money, and the money that you spend just goes into conflict with what you want to actually be doing. So I don't know what that is. Let me know what that ends up being in the comments below. Then we get to December, and the last two things that we really have is another Mercury retrograde in Capricorn, back in your third house. What's important about this is you have to remember what was going on in January. What was going on in January when Mercury stationed retrograde? Because Mercury is going to be stationing retrograde at the exact same degree that it's stationed direct on earlier in the year. So there's something, this is third house, siblings, neighbors, short distance travel, cars, communication, technology. There's something that you completed in the winter that you're going to be coming back to here at the very end of December. So really pay attention to that Mercury retrograde in January. Then right after that, Jupiter stations direct in Taurus, pretty much right on New Year's, back in your seventh house of relationships. And so this is that point where, Jupiter's been moving backwards for some time. You've been really thinking, really questioning your beliefs around relationships, really questioning what you want. And then Jupiter stations direct, and it allows for all of that abundance to come back in, right? As long as you've remained grateful and have had faith and have really figured out what you value and what you don't. When Jupiter stations direct, this is more expansion in the relationships, more expansion in the fun. Jupiter going retrograde is kind of going without that, and you kind of have to create it within, or kind of remember, what you're grateful for. This is where it's like, the relationship stuff is blowing back up again. It's much more fun at this point. In my opinion, that leads us to, that's how we go into 2024. So with that being said, let me know what you guys think about this year in the comments below. Let me know what you're excited for. Let me know what you're worried about. Make sure you subscribe to the channel. I'm going to be having videos about Saturn in Pisces, Jupiter in Taurus, Jupiter in Aries, and all of that stuff, and you don't want to miss it, so make sure you subscribe. But with that being said, thank you guys so much for watching, liking, listening, sharing, commenting, subscribing. I love and appreciate every single one of you, and I'll be seeing you next year.